These 10 nights, the talks are on the spirituality and self-development, an important theme during the month of Ramadan. And we're very fortunate to have Shaykh Kumail Rajani, who will be speaking to us on the 7 stages of nafs in this 4-part series. Today will be the 3rd of his 4 parts, and tomorrow, after his 4th and final part, we will have 10 minutes for question and answers. So look forward to hearing from many of you then. Shaykh Rajani is a postdoc research fellow in Islamic Studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. He completed his doctoral thesis entitled Making Sense of Ismaili Traditions, the modes and meanings of the transmission of hadith in the works of Al-Qadi al-Nu'man. And he spent a number of years in the Hawza of Qum, studying and teaching classical Islamic texts of hadith, fiqh, and Islamic legal theory. We're very fortunate to have him again, and we look forward to hearing more. So let's welcome him with salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Respected sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Qad aflaha man zakkaha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ash-Shams verse number 9 mentions, successful indeed are those who purify their soul. In continuation of our discussion of examining various stages of nafs, we reached at stage number 4. A person who purifies her or his soul can elevate the soul to the stage of an-nafsul aqila, or in other words, we could call an-nafsul mulhama. Just to recap, our first nafs was an-nafsul ammara, the second nafs being an-nafsul lawama, the third being an-nafsul natiqa or an-nafsul mutafakkira. The fourth one is an-nafsul aqila or an-nafsul mulhama. Let's dissect the word aqila first of all before we begin to discuss the characteristics of an-nafsul aqila. In Arabic, the word al-aqila is derived from the word al-aql. Al-aql means to tie something. The word aql is usually used when a camel is tied. It would call iqalul ba'ir. So when you tie, for example, like, if someone is on a journey and he has taken his camel for a specific journey, if that person wants to tie the camel, in today's world we would call to park the camel. If that person wants to tie the camel, the rope through which that person is going to tie the camel, that rope is supposed to be called iqalul ba'ir. The rope which is tying, which is restricting that particular camel. Or if we have seen Arab men in Arabic culture, many men we would have seen they wear that scarf, and above the scarf they wear a black ring or any type of any other color ring. That particular ring is in English we might call it ring or something else, but in Arabic it is called iqal. Why it is called iqal? Because it restricts the scarf. If there was no ring which would hold that piece of cloth or that scarf, there is a reason to believe that the scarf would fall off from the head, right? So the function, the role of that ring is to restrict, and for that reason it is called iqal. So iqal or aql is something which ties, which keeps things under control, which does not allow things. Iqal are those things which do not allow things to fall away. Rather, it keeps them restricted. So that's iqal. So when we call an-nafsul aqila, fundamentally what we are trying to conceive of an-nafsul aqila is the nafs which is restricting us, which is keeping us under control, which is restricting us from going astray. That's what we could call an-nafsul aqila. The other name for this nafs is an-nafsul mulahama. And both these things, interestingly, we find verses in Quran. For example, for an-nafsul mulahama in Surah Ash-Shams, which we have been discussing, verse number 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. we have made this particular nafs, we have inspired that nafs for alhamaha. So we have done ilham to this nafs, we have inspired this nafs about what? About both the paths, the path of evil and the path of piety. And it's upon human beings to select which one, based on the exercise of a sound reasoning. It is up to an individual to explore and to examine which one is going to work for his or her salvation. So that's an-nafsul mulahama. In reference to an-nafsul aqila, in Surah Al-Anfal, verse number 22, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, Inna sharra ad-dawabi inda Allahi as-sum al-bukm alladhina la yaqilun. The worst of the creatures in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is deaf or dumb, and alladhina la yaqilun, who are not restrained, who are not controlled. In other words, we would say who are not exercising their own reasoning. So both the word al-aqila and both and the second one mulhama, we could derive from these two verses of Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Ash-Shams. So what is the characteristic or feature of an-nafsul aqila, an-nafsul mulhama? How do we recognize whether we have attained that stage of an-nafsul aqila? So the person who is at the stage of an-nafsul aqila, we would like to think of that person being well balanced, well restricted. As Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam in Nahjul Balagha, the short saying number 70, he mentioned, La yural jahilu illa mufritan aw mufarrita. You won't see an ignorant person. You won't see a non-aqil person, an ignorant person, except he or she would be indulged in some sort of extremity. Either they would go beyond the limit or they would do under what is required from them. So either they would be on the path of ifrat or they would be on the path of tafreed, exaggeration at both the ends. And other parts of Nahjul Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, if I'm not mistaken, sermon number 16, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam mentions, Al-Yamin wa Shimal Maballa wa Tariqul Wusta Hiyal Jadda. Left and right are the ways of deviance. Wa Tariqul Wusta, the right way. As-Siratul Mustaqim, that's the highway a person needs to take for his own journey. So moving in different directions is not going to help our rule. It's not going to help us elevate to the level of an-nafsul aqila. So the person who is at the stage of an-nafsul aqila, you would see them well balanced in their life. They are directed, they are motivated for being very much on the straight path, on as-siratul mustaqim. Let's dive deeper into a couple of examples from Nahjul Balagha and other hadiths and few Quranic verses to examine how this balanced path is required from a person who is at the stage of an-nafsul aqila or an-nafsul mulhama. The first example which comes to my mind is the example of a very simple example, what we do in our daily lives, like, praising someone or criticizing someone. Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam mentions that a person who is at the stage of an-nafsul aqila would be well balanced in this mundane affair, or like, a minor thing. Imam mentioned, Athanau bi-akthara min al-istihaqaq malakun. وَالتَّقْصِيرُ أَنْهُ عِيُّنَ وَحَسَدٌ. Imam mentions that a person, if you are supposed to, or if you are expected to praise someone, and if you praise beyond the limit, beyond what that person deserves, you need to understand that praise is somehow what we could call sycophancy. You are like, crossing the limit. The person does not deserve that much of praise. You are seeking a favor from that person. And for that reason, you are praising them beyond what you are expected to praise. On the other hand, see, that's a balance, right? What Imam is encouraging us to reflect upon. That if you go beyond the limit, if you do not praise to the extent that person, that particular person, that particular individual is deserving, if you praise them less than that, that's the sign of ear. or hasad, inability to speak, or Imam says that's a sign of you being envious to that person. So in a very simple affair, what we do in our daily lives, Imam is expecting us, based on this hadith, that we are required, a person who is the stage of nafsul aqila, that they are well balanced, even in simple thing. The other example, in friendship or animosity, if you want to make a friend, or if you are not in a good relation with someone, Imam says, like in such affairs, you need to have a fine balance, a fine-tuned balance. In Nahjul Balaga, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, it is reported on the authority of Imam Ali, in which Imam is said to have said, is believed to have said, Ahbib, Habibaka Honanma. That when you're close to someone, if you want to make friendship with someone, it should be in a certain limit. Ahbib Habibaka Honanma, Asa Yakuna Baghidaka Yomama. You need to keep in mind there is a human tendency, like at some point of time you are going to break off, right? You are going to separate from that individual. So you shouldn't be revealing all your secrets you would be sharing with your own family members, with the other people who are not in that close circle or close group. On the other side, when you are breaking with someone, be mindful, be careful. That should be in a particular way. It shouldn't be far beyond what is expected from the tradition of separating someone. It might be that in near future you would turn friends once again. So at the time of breaking up, you spoke those things which you were not expected to speak. You're not expected to say those things, right? All those swear words, all those things which there in your dictionary, you just dumped it off, and now you would be regretting when you want to reconnect with that individual. So in terms of animosity, in terms of expressing that hate, it needs to be in fine balance if circumstances arises, right? The third example, in charity, Quran mentions, like, La taj'al yadaka maghlulatan ila unuqik. Even in terms of charity, we are expected to be in fine balance. We are not expected to give beyond what is required from us. So what this verse mentions, La taj'al yadaka maghlulatan ila unuqik. Do not tie your hands to your necks. Arabic expressions which would simply mean that, don't be stingy, just give it out. لا تجعل يدك مغلولة إلى عنقك ولا تبسطها كل البسط. But on the other hand, do not give everything what you have, because something needs to be left for your children, something are required to left for your wife, for your family members. So even in terms of charity, there needs to be a fine balance. How beautifully Quran uses this word. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا. When Quran lists the attributes, the qualities of Ibadur Rahman, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions one of the attributes, one of the qualities of the close servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that when they give something in charity, الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا. They do not fall in the trap of israf, or what the community would call it, asraf. Right? So even in terms of charity, Quran uses the word israf, that you can't be indulging in israf even in charity. There is nothing what you might call it, like, spend as much as you could, and there is no limit in charity. No, there is a limit in charity. What Quran says, like, it shouldn't be reaching to the level of israf. الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا. At the same time, on the other hand, they are not stingy. وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. They have a fine balance, right? So people at the stage of an-nafsul aqila, they are restricted. That particular nafs, Nafsul Aqila, does not allow him or her to go astray beyond the limit or less than what is required. The other example, number 4, which comes to my mind, is about Hub and Bughz of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, in Nahjul Balaga, he mentions Halaka fiya rajulan. There are 2 types of people who are deviated when it comes to me. I mean, when it comes to, in reference to hate or love of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The Imam says, Muhibbun ghal and mufretun qal. There are certain individuals who have reached to the level of ghulu. They're exaggerating the status and the level of Aimma alayhi salam. So they are deviated. But then on the other hand, there are people who are mufretun qal, who are downplaying the status of imams, right? So they are deviated as well. So here again, Imam is expecting from us to have a fine balance. What I would call a person at the stage of a nafsul aqila would have that restraint, would have that control, not to go in the exaggerated mode and not downplaying the status of the Imam. The fifth example, which I would like to give, I will conclude over here, is in terms of ibadah. Sometimes we would say, like, well, there is no limit in ibadah. More you do is more is merrier. But then when it comes to Imam Ali in Nahjul Balagha, he mentions lil mu'min thalasu sa'at. A mu'min has to distinguish or plan it in such a way that a part of the day is devoted to prayers and worship and ibadah, not the entire day. Right? There is a chapter in Al-Kafi, Babul Iqtisad fil Ibadah, a fine moderation when it comes to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are a couple of examples. I give just 5 examples to demonstrate how a person at the stage of a nafsul aqila would be restrained, would be well under control, would be balanced in all the spheres of his or her life. And that is what exactly required from us. Quran says, Qad aflaha man zakka. The journey of self-purification, when a person attains that level is what Quran would call tazkiyatun nafs, purification of soul. And why not to invest in this nafs, in the discussion of nafs? Why not to allow the ruh to explore and reach and get it elevated to the level of an-nafsul aqil? Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahjul Balagha, he mentions in, if I'm not mistaken, sermon number 32, Imam says, بَئْسَ الْمَتْجَرْ أَنْتَرَ الدُّنْيَا لِأَنفَسِكُمْ ثَمَنًا وَمِمَّا إِنْدَ اللَّهِ عِوَزًا. So what a bad transaction. Imam says, what a bad bargaining you people are doing in this world. بَئْسَ الْمَتْجَرْ أَنْتَرَ الدُّنْيَا. That you are looking at this dunya as a thing, as a commodity which you could transact with your nafs. You're selling your nafs and getting this dunya as a bargain. Imam says that's a very bad deal. Another part of Nahjul Balagha, in Kalimatul Qasar, in short sayings number 456, Imam mentions, Ala hurrun yada'u hadihi lumadata li ahlaha. Is there any individual who would do a good transaction and sell this lumaza? Lumaza is a leftover thing, right? Imam is indicating towards dunya. Is there any individual who is ready to sell this dunya to the people who are interested in this dunya, right? And you should be knowing, فَإِنَّهُ لَيْسَ لَأَنفُسِكُمْ ثَمَنٌ إِلَّا الْجَنَّةِ. If there is any bargain to sell your nafs and get something, that something is supposed to be Jannah. فَلَا تَبِعُوهَا إِلَّا بِهَا. If you want to sell it, just sell it to Jannah. Sell your nafs and gain the Jannah, gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is Jannah. Quran mentions, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسُهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرَضَاتِ اللَّهِ. That there are people who would sell their nafs. Why? To get that ridwan, to get that Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that paradise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the reasoning that Jannah is a place where we would be in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by this particular an-nafsul aqila, what I was trying to mention and discuss over here, that a person who is elevated, the person's ruh is elevated to the stage where we could call his or her nafs at the stage of an-nafsul aqila, that person would be well balanced in all the sphere of her or his life, and have a proper understanding of the value of nafs. And if there is a selling point, if there is a bargain, there is nothing which this nafs could be sold off but to paradise and proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.